I want to say that if you had asked me when I started Women in Trucking in 2007 that we would have 8,000 members in 10 countries and on the board of directors, names like Walmart and Daimler and, Great Dane and it just, PACCAR, I look at the board and I think, wow, these big companies are committed to gender diversity and they're supporting the mission of Women in Trucking. And to have over 8,000 people out there writing a check every year and paying dues because they support our mission, that to me is just heartwarming.
Hey everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Caution Wide Right. I'm Luke, your host, and with me today is the one and only founder of the Women in Trucking organization, Ellen Voie. Ellen is an internationally recognized speaker and authority on gender diversity and inclusion for women in transportation. She started Women in Trucking in 2007 after decades in the transportation industry and saw it grow from hundreds to now over 8,000 members across 10 countries. Women in Trucking basically represents women that, as Ellen likes to say, design the trucks, build the trucks, buy the trucks, sell the trucks, own the trucks, fix the trucks, and drive the trucks. And I'm sure you can include the brokers, the insurance agents, the safety and compliance, human resources, and so much more involved. So Ellen, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks so much for that introduction, Luke. You did your homework very well.
Well, and we can go on and on about your background, and honestly, it could have been the whole hour of the time we have, but I do want to change things up a little bit. I also know that you recently retired from Women in Trucking, specifically as the president and CEO, albeit still involved in different roles. This is alongside the retirement of Shar, who helped you build the organization from the very beginning. And with both of you backing away from the day-to-day, I'm just curious what stories you have of the two of you that sort of jump into memory from over the years.
I was always the idea person, so I'd come up with these ideas. Like I'd see, like at Women in Aviation, I'd see them have a gathering and they give them all the same color T-shirts. And so I told Shar, I said, I want to do that in trucking. I want to have a salute to women behind the wheel. And she said, okay, but we have to have chocolate because it is Women in Trucking. So it was her idea to have a chocolate fountain. And so every year at every year at our salute to women behind the wheel, we've had a chocolate fountain. But so I'd come up with these ideas and she would implement them and she would make the vision a reality. But she's very detail oriented and organized, and I wasn't. So we made a great team.
And now stepping away, sort of the next chapter for Women in Trucking, I'm just curious, how does that future look? Of course, you're going to have it in good hands. How's it going to look?
Well, over the years, this last 16 years, every time we would bring on some new staff people, I would shed some of the duties that I didn't like to do. Okay, so like I said, I'm the idea person. I do not like spreadsheets. I do not like key performance indicators. I do not like budgets. I do not like that part. I just want to talk about how to get more women in transportation careers. And so over the years, I've delegated those things. And so now, towards the end, my job was managing the organization, but really going out and speaking. I speak at a lot of events. I have about 6 or 7 events just in October where I'm speaking. And that's what I love to do. So the retirement part of it meant turning over the management of the organization, but I'm still doing the speaking and the presenting and things like that because I still have that passion. And the new CEO has a background in association management, which means she knows how to run an association. But my background's in trucking and the people in trucking, and that's where my passion lies.
And I'm curious, there is a video of you online back in 2010 at the Great American Truck Show getting a tattoo. And you mentioned in the video that jokingly saying that if you hit 2,000 members, that maybe you'd add on to that. Now with 8,000, did you ever do any other additions to a tattoo with the other milestones?
You're right. I did make that comment that when we hit 1,000 members, I'd get the tattoo. I still have the tattoo. And we always try to think, what could I do differently? I've already done skydiving and, things like that. So it's like, we would brainstorm, like, what could we do as a publicity stunt? But didn't really follow up on that other than, I guess the goal was to have a conference, and last year we had almost 1,800 at our conference. So I really should do something celebratory. I don't know. I have to come up with some ideas, I guess.
Well, if you hit 10,000, maybe make the new president have to do it.
Exactly.
So a little bit more about your background. I was curious, obviously you've talked about it before a little bit, but your master's thesis in the 90s was about the complex identities of women married to professional truck drivers. And in it, you say that women married to truck drivers are very independent, and when their husbands come home from on the road, that they have to switch and adapt to become a couple again. I'm just curious, among the 8 women that you interviewed for your thesis, is there a story that specifically stands out to you today, or even that one that maybe you relate to the most?
There is one very, very powerful story. A woman who had, I think, 6 or 7 children. And I asked her, I said, what do you do when you're missing your husband? And she said, I sit down and I hug my kids. And I said, is that why you had so many kids? And she goes, oh my God. I mean, like a light bulb went on, like she was filling a space with her by having more kids because she missed her husband. And it hit us both. It's like, wow. I mean, you filled a space with something. For me, it was going to college. I mean, it took me 13 years to finish my bachelor's and my master's because I was raising 2 children. I was consulting, running a small company with my former husband. I mean, it took me a long time to finish. But I think that was where I was filling my space. But she realized when I was interviewing her for the thesis that that's how she was filling her space, for loneliness.
Well, honestly, I was reading it over and I could relate to it a lot because I grew up in the military. And so my mom, my dad was gone all the time, special forces especially. So he was gone for deployment or, being TDY, especially when we were very young, newborns. My sister was a toddler and my mom's a superhero. She had to deal with that, by herself, especially, moving away from family. She didn't really have a family group. Every once in a while they'd come over, kind of a thing, but there's the women's spouses club in the military, and I'm curious, does women in trucking have part of that role for that stay at home, the family behind the trucking industry?
Women in trucking doesn't, but I used to belong to an organization that catered to women married to professional drivers. It was called A Trucker's Wife, and we would have a conference, and it was a support net. But I have to tell you, it's when I did my thesis, my professors told me come up with some new knowledge, and I did have to study MIA, POWs, military, and also commuting spouses. But the difference between military and commuting as opposed to trucking is there's an end typically, where especially with commuter couples, they end up either getting married or changing jobs. And in the military, the eventual goal is to have the person back home, which doesn't always happen, so it could be similar. But the biggest challenge is the returning spouse. And in my thesis, it was a male, it was the men. Right. But when they come back, knowing where they fit in. And one of the struggles one of the truck drivers' wives had was her husband would come home after being gone, and her teenage daughter would do something. He'd say, well, you're grounded for 2 weeks. Okay, then he'd go back on the road. Guess what mom did? Ungrounded her immediately because she had to drive the younger sister around. So by him grounding her, it actually added an extra burden on mom. And so, I mean, knowing where they fit in was often a struggle because, like I said in the thesis, she's one person when he's home, she's part of a couple, and she's not, she's very independent and, self-sufficient when he's on the road. And I'll tell you one other story that I remember it really hurt. It happened to be a rare Sunday when my former husband went to church with me, because typically he was on the road. And this couple came up to us and said, oh, hey, why don't you join our couples Bible study? And he just goes, well, I can. I'm a truck driver. And they turned and walked away. and left me just standing there. And I thought, well, nobody asked. I didn't fit in. I wasn't a couple, but yet I wasn't single. So when I go out with my single friends, no, I'm not single. I'm married, but and I'm part of a couple. But you guys are all single, and you didn't really fit in. In that environment. So my heart goes out to anyone who has a spouse that's away from home for any length of time, because it's not easy.
Yeah, and I'm curious, so after 16 years with Women in Trucking, obviously there's more and more women involved, especially on the driving side, and sort of maybe that role flips a bit. The women's out on the road, maybe the spouse is at home. If you were to rewrite the thesis today, or if you were to include the other side of the coin, the woman coming home, how would you see, what would be similar? What would be different about it?
Well, the similar would be the returning spouse knowing where to fit in. But what would be different is like stay-at-home dads have a tough job because they're mingling with the stay-at-home moms, and do they fit in at a Girl Scout camp? Do they fit in, at toddler time? So they're even going to have because it's a different role. If it's the dad at home with the family and the mom out on the road, or the mom in the military, or the mom, commuting. So, it's going against people's stereotypes. So they have an added burden on them.
And you mentioned the Girl Scouts. I know that you were a part of getting the transportation patch started. I'm just curious the story behind that and how that's going. Actually, once I heard about it, I'm like, I'm going to definitely start it up. My daughter's in Girl Scouts, and so I'm like, I'm definitely going to try to get our company to get that set up, because we could totally do that.
Well, and it's a great publicity and PR event. So I found out that the Boy Scouts had a transportation patch. And so I checked with the Girl Scouts, and they said, no, we don't. Supply chain. And so at the time, my board chair served on the Greater Chicago, Northern Indiana region for Girl Scouts. And so we created the curriculum. We had someone design the patch. And over about 1,400 girls have earned that patch. So we have the curriculum. We even have an activity book that's called Scouting for Cookies. And it talks about how the grain goes from the field to the bakery in a truck, bakery to packaging in a truck, packaging to, warehousing or whatever. And who's the final mile? The Girl Scout. And the goal of that book is so Girl Scouts will look at a truck and say, that could be my milk in there. That could be the grain for my cookies. That could be, whatever. We want them to have a personal relationship with the trucks on the road, because anyone in the trucking industry knows that most people don't think about trucks. All they do is see them as in the way on the highway, and they don't think about them. And people tell me that over and over. They don't think about trucks. They're the biggest silent, industry in the world. And the only time they think about trucks is either if a truck's in an accident, or if it's in their way on the road. They really don't think about trucks on a day-to-day basis. So that was the goal, was to make young Girl Scouts look at trucks and think, also, maybe I could do that job.
Yeah, and I just had Ron with Transport for Christ and 2 Christian authors come on who just wrote a book, and I sort of, we talked about sort of the balance between their book and the realities of trucking and why they need the book. But they said the same thing. Their eyes were open to not just, the drivers driving down the road, but the things that they have to deal with from coming back home. The lifestyle is totally foreign to them, and boy, did they learn a lot. But it's definitely, that's totally the unspoken thing, is the perspective of the industry. One of the benefits with COVID was there was a little bit of recognition to making sure that drivers come, the toilet paper shortage and things like that. But so quickly they forget.
Look, I want to add something. People outside the industry have a different perception of the industry, and they don't have the respect for drivers being a skilled profession. But also, I will tell you that when, being in a trucking family and the driver is gone, and at that time it was weeks at a time, 5 or 6 weeks at a time, people assume that he's cheating and that we have an unhappy marriage. They just assume that. So one of the things that my professors told me, they said, figure out what couples, successful married couples in long distance relationships have, and it's not time and distance apart. And you know what it is? Values.
Right.
You could be in a 9 to 5 office job and be home every night and still cheat. So, I mean, they think that, the industry has this perception that, drivers just aren't, like it's a second profession or that something they're falling back on. We need to change that. We need to, but drivers need to also help us do that by dressing professionally, and acting professionally. So by adding more women in the industry, I believe we're elevating the image of the profession, because people are looking at the industry and saying, wow, women can do this job and women can do this well.
I completely agree. That's well put. So you mentioned women in trucking. It was started when you were getting your pilot license, and there was a flight or a women in flight aviation organization, but there wasn't one for trucking. I'm curious, from the pilot background, and of course, you mentioned as you were retiring from women in trucking, you could maybe be in your plane a little bit more often or more opportunities. I'm curious, what is more difficult, a pre-trip inspection for a truck or the pre-flight takeoff routine for a plane?
More difficult in the truck, pre-trip inspection, because you're sharing the road with, brake lines and broken, cracked or broken lug nuts or things like that, air brakes and things like that. People are around you, and if a tire blew or something, you could, jeopardize people on the highway. But in the air, it's you.
Totally.
So, I mean, the other thing is, you always hear about checklists. We have checklists. And even though I've been flying since 2008, I still use my checklist for flying. Where I think a lot of drivers, they memorize it, but you don't want to get sloppy. But for flying, you can't get sloppy. You can't miss something. You can't have the wheel chocks on there. You can't forget that the flaps are down or something like that. You really have to go through the checklist and make sure that you've checked everything before you take off.
Totally. And, you have your CDL, you have your aviation license, and you have your motorcycle license. I'm curious, which was hardest to get?
Oh, boy.
For you?
The pilot's license. And it, to be honest with you, it all happened in 1 year. It was just,
wow.
Well, it took me, my pilot's license, I had started and I'd gone through a year, and then I moved. And I got set back and I had to get reacclimated. So the pilot's license really took 3 years from start to finish, even though there was a year in there where I wasn't flying. So that one, I got in October of 2008. And then I went to truck driving school in December of 2008. And so that's when I thought, well, I might as well get my motorcycle license if I can fly an airplane and drive a tractor trailer. So I did that in the spring. And it was all the year I turned 50. So my daughter is like, are you okay, Mom? Are you trying to mark things off your bucket list or whatever? But it just happened to fall into that year. And so then a friend of mine wanted me to go skydiving, a group of us. And so we did. I took my first jump on Mother's Day and jumped 2 weeks later.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. But, by that time, my daughter was in college, and it was like, I can do this. I can go have fun now.
Yep. Whether you call it a midlife crisis, the empty nest syndrome, just having fun.
Exactly. And I do not drive. I do have the CDL. I kept my CDL, but I do fly. In fact, I might go flying this afternoon. It's a beautiful day in Wisconsin. So, and I bought a house real close to the airport, so I can actually watch airplanes take off and land all day.
And I'm curious, if you had a CDL, what would your CDL handle be, or call sign? I don't know if you have a specific call sign for your plane, but do you have a call sign, or what would your CB handle be?
Well, I'll tell you, I did have a CB handle.
Oh, okay.
I went to broadcasting school in high school, or just after high school. So my CB handle was Ohio DJ, because I was a disc jockey in Ohio, Salina, Ohio. But I'll tell you a quick story about my plane. So everyone said, you have to name your plane, right? And my plane has gold and black stripes. So I was visiting relatives in Norway, Arendal, Norway, and they said, "Oh, you should come out and see our new airport, but it's got the weirdest name." And I said, "Well, what's the name of the airport?" And they said, "Gullknapp," which means gold button. And I thought, wow, that's it. That's the name of my plane, is Gullknapp. And my daughter bought a decal that goes on the tail, and it just says Gullknapp, and everyone's like, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means gold button." So I love it. My airplane's called Gullknapp.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Button. Yeah.
Well, since we're asking rapid fire questions, I'll ask you one more. What is your favorite trucking movie or movie with trucks in it?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I don't know that I have a favorite. I'll tell you what, I enjoyed Thelma and Louise.
Oh, yeah.
Because a friend of mine was the semi driver, the stuntman in that movie. So
Oh, wow.
Mike Ryan, yeah. And when I was on the Trucker Buddy, when I worked for Trucker Buddy, he was on the board of directors. So I knew that he was the driver in that movie. But it's got a bad ending, so I don't know that would be a favorite movie, but
Yeah, and I always like to mention, like, I trip up people, they think the trucking movies specifically, but I'm like, I mean, you got The Matrix where they're on the back of the trucks doing all kinds of cool stuff, racing movies where they're going underneath trucks. I mean, hopefully that doesn't happen in real life, but.
the trucks that are depicted in movies like Duel, those are scary.
Yeah.
Maybe Smoking the Bandit. Maybe how's that one for a?
That's perfect. Perfect. Well, and you mentioned Trucking Buddy, and I'm curious. So in 2000, you served on the board of directors for them, and it's a pen pal program for professional drivers. I'm curious, did you have a pen pal during that time, and do you still talk to anyone pen pal wise today?
Actually, I didn't have the pen pal. I was the coordinator, the executive director, and Shar worked with me there at Trucker Buddy.
Cool.
And I still stay in touch with some of the teachers.
Yeah.
So yeah, we made friends, and I know that Trucker Buddy is struggling right now, and I hope that they can get it back off the ground. But I made some great friends. In fact, a lot of the drivers are still friends with me. I still know a lot of drivers from the Trucker Buddy program. So shout out to all the drivers out there.
Totally. And Women in Trucking has a mentorship program. I'm just curious, does your time at Trucker Buddy did that grow into sort of the mentorship program for you, or how did that get started?
Well, the mentorship program really didn't have anything to do with Trucker Buddy, but it's very important because there's so many young women coming in this industry, and whether they're engineers or dispatchers or drivers or mechanics, diesel techs, they want to talk to someone who's already done that. In fact, this week I spoke in Phoenix, and there was a woman who took over her family's trucking company, and she said, "I want to talk to someone who's done that." And I said, "Oh yeah, these are 5 of my friends who took over their dad's trucking companies, and they're women." So, I mean, it's great to have someone who went before you, and you can ask them questions and say, "So how did you deal with this? How do you establish credibility when you're the daughter of the owner?"
Totally. And so you mentioned one. I'm just curious, is there other sort of success stories that come to mind when you think about the program?
Oh, the mentoring program?
The mentorship program, yeah.
Absolutely. I've been contacted by women all over the world. A woman in Poland started a logistics company. We have a woman in Ghana, Africa, started a fuel delivery company. She even came to our conference. So giving them access to someone who might have done the job before and maybe has some insight is so helpful.
And so with the mentorship program, I know on your website you mention, the Women in Trucking website mentions that since the Me Too movement, oftentimes many men in the trucking industry might fear or concern about mentoring a woman that they're, in close proximity. I'm just curious, how do you suggest to men to mentor women in the industry so they feel safe and heard? Great
question. Visibility and transparency. So if you're going to have lunch with someone, invite someone with. If you're going to travel with someone, make sure that you are being upfront and, setting boundaries. But men need to mentor women, especially in a male-populated environment where there's a lot of men who have gone before us. But you just have to set boundaries and make sure that the boundaries are being met. I'll tell you a quick funny story. One of the women that I interviewed for my thesis, her husband was a trainer at a trucking company, and he would call her before he would train a female, and he would have her come in and have lunch, and she got to give the thumbs up or thumbs down. And if she said, no, she's not going with you, he wouldn't take her. And the company was okay with that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. So women in trucking today, over 16 years, the mission statement for women in trucking's never changed. And like the 3 missions are encourage employment for women in trucking, address obstacles, and celebrate success. So I'm just curious, starting with the first one, encouraging employment, a lot of statistics, especially you guys are started a lot of those statistics, the tracking, the surveying, and things like that. What's the latest employment statistics look like today and over the years?
So it actually went from 13.7 2 years ago to 12, just under 13 this year. Part of that was due to the economy. A lot of women are in a team configuration with a husband or spouse or someone else. And so when miles are down and rates are down, and then one of them might go back home and get a job. So slightly down. But I think that will reverse itself. That also happened during COVID when the percentage of women in the industry dropped. But it's gone dramatically. I mean, there weren't good statistics back 20 years ago, but I've been told it was about 3%, and I believe that. So if we're at 13% female drivers, which is over the road, then we're doing really good. What I'm really happy to see, lots more women in safety careers. Yeah. Lots more women as dispatchers. And I mentioned before the show that we have a Women in Trucking Scholarship Foundation. We give scholarships in 4 areas, and one of them is a safety area, one is a diesel tech, one is driver, and then one we loosely define as leadership, which means anyone working in the industry who wants to advance their career can apply for scholarship. So it's a separate corporation from the association. The association is what we call a trade professional organization, and right. The foundation is actually a charity. So 2 separate boards, 2 separate sets of management, but I founded both of them. So
awesome. So your second mission, addressing obstacles. Obviously, safety is always the biggest one. I think you mentioned before that the average was like 4.4 was sort of the average of feeling safe in the industry. How does that look today, and how are things addressing the safety?
So we still need to go further on safety, and that means safety at the truck stops. It means safety, is the driver the captain of the ship? In other words, if they say, well, there's a protest there, or there's a tornado or a hurricane or a snowstorm, I don't want to go there. Does the company say, that's fine, you make that call because it's your life? Or does the company say, this is trucking? So that's a part of it. And then the inspection or the maintenance of the equipment is very important, because unsafe equipment, broken down equipment is not safe. And so you'll see, I hear anecdotally that female drivers actually look up the safety scores of a company before they go there. And so, they're looking for a company that cares about their safety, their personal safety. So that's one of the obstacles. Another obstacle is we work with the truck manufacturers on truck cab design and ergonomics, and they will tell you that in the past they designed trucks for men. Well, now we're sending women to their factories. They're doing measurements on women. They're making sure that women are as comfortable in the cab of a truck as men, which means seeing over the dash, being able to see the mirrors, reaching the pedals, things like that, which I've heard so many stories of women having to sit on pillows or put blocks on their, pedals or whatever. And that's changing because they're making it more adaptable. So and then something as simple as making sure that women get uniforms that fit them, women's cut uniforms. And when I stand up in front of trucking companies and I'll even say, hey, if it's a conference, and I'll say, so you guys have a golf outing? And they're like, yeah. And I said, do you have men's polos and women's polos or t-shirts or whatever? And they're like, oh no, we just have men's. And women are expected to wear the men's shirts. So a company that is very sensitive and wants to be more gender diverse will take that into consideration and be the first to say we're ordering women's shirts.
And does women in trucking get involved a lot with sort of the legislative process? So I know truck parking is a big issue right now, and there's an important piece for women to be involved in that discussion. And there's also the bathroom bills, whether it's a federal bill or state by state. I'm curious, how are you guys involved on the legislative side of things?
So typically, we didn't get involved legislatively because we have both drivers and carriers that are members. But if there's something that all of our members would agree on, which the restroom access bill, how can you not support
Exactly.
a restroom access bill? Truck parking, our aspect will be safety as far as truck parking, and that's the, but the restroom access bill, research from American Transportation Research Institute found that female commercial drivers were 83% more likely to be detained 6 hours or more. So think about that as far as access to a restroom at a warehouse. And I have to mention, they're not detained because they're women. They're detained because they're not going in there pounding on the, they're being nice. And so we're telling female drivers, go, it's okay to be assertive. It's okay to say, come on, I got a load to catch. So let's get me out of here so that women aren't detained longer than men.
Totally. And then I know, a lot of involvement with like human trafficking. I'm curious on the education side with that. There's a couple other organizations too. I think that you're a part of as well. Over the years, how has that been improving on that education and that understanding?
So we support Truckers Against Trafficking, great organization, but you might hear women say that they'll be stopped at a truck stop, especially in the past. Why are you here? And show me your CDL to show me you're really a driver. Women shouldn't have to show their CDL to show that they're really a driver. But we support Truckers Against Trafficking and have them, at any event that we have, we give them a booth. But we did a lip balm campaign with them a number of years ago, where they took 25 of our female drivers and trained them in identifying human trafficking, and then we gave them lip balm. And so, because our female drivers have access to the female victims of human trafficking in maybe a restroom at a truck stop, so they could give the lip balm. It wasn't highly successful, but I think that's because our female drivers typically they know which truck stops have a lot of that kind of activity, and they stay away from truck stops that have negative activity. So I think they were avoiding places where that kind of, that was occurring, and so they didn't have as much access as we thought they would have.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then, so the third piece of your mission was celebrating success. And I'm curious, I would like to hear one story of a historical past success in the transportation industry, and one, maybe a recent one that sticks to your mind.
So we have our influential woman in trucking, and we also have a distinguished woman in logistics. We started a driver of the year that's only about 3 years old. But a story, so we bring the influential women in trucking and have them serve on a panel and share their insight at our conference. And one of them was a woman from PACCAR, and she shared that she was in the engineering, I think, or tech, anyway, a very high-level executive. And she shared that when she got pregnant, her boss called and said, well, I assume you're quitting. And just made that assumption. And she said, why would I quit? And he goes, well, you have a child, you need to raise your family. And things are changing, but sometimes people still think that women with young children need to stay home. And that's a misconception, especially for the driver population. It's like, if you have a family member who is a caregiver, you can do this job.
Totally. So you've mentioned a couple times, Accelerate is the conference that Women in Trucking has each year. It started in 2015. You mentioned that last November it had like 1,750 attendees, hopefully over 2,000 this year. And it's going to be in November 5th through 8th in Dallas, Texas, and there's 70 plus educational sessions and tons of people there. So it's a great thing to get plugged into. Do you have a topic that you'll be chatting about?
No, actually, believe it or not, I'm not going.
Well, so if you did though, what would you want to talk about? What would you address?
Talk about attracting and retaining female drivers and all the data that I have. But I have to tell you, I'm not going because I think it would be very difficult to watch someone else up on stage at an event that was mine. So I'm going to let her, the new CEO is Jennifer Hedrick, let her be front and center and let her, run things the way she wants to run them without me looking over her shoulder.
What's some of the best memories you have from the conferences over the years?
Oh boy, everybody, this is going to be egotistical, but people stop me all the time and want to get their picture taken with me, and it just blows my mind. It's like, I don't know why you want your picture with me. It's just a conference, but I love it. I mean, and I love it when people come up to me and tell me that, Ellen, I learned this from you, or I learned that from you. And the favorite thing that I love the most when I give a presentation or a speech, I want people to say, I hadn't thought about that. I want to make them think about things and look at things in a different way. And that's my goal.
Awesome. So moving forward, I know you're still going to continue your podcast or your radio show. And I'm just curious, what other things are you going to be doing moving forward? I know grandchildren are around, and there's a lot of organizations you've been a part of before. Are you still involved in some of those other things? What's it look like?
So yeah, my daughter and her husband had their third child just a few weeks ago. So that's going to be, she calls me and I get to go and cuddle, and then fly my airplane. I also, in addition to the speaking that I'm doing, my goal is to take my 44 years of industry expertise, and that's everything from regulatory, from licensing and permitting in the past when I was a consultant, to being a shipper, to being, a more in the gender diversity side of it. You hear DE&I initiatives all the time. I want to take that knowledge and still give it back to the industry by serving on corporate boards. And so I have been actively reaching out and saying, is there a position? I know that they're trying to add more women on boards, especially in the transportation industry. I'd be happy to serve in that capacity. And so that's kind of where that way I can still use my brain and give back to the industry. So that's kind of my goal, is to keep speaking for women in trucking. I'll keep my radio show on Sirius XM, which is Saturday mornings, and then serve on some corporate boards.
Awesome. And, obviously, looking at our YouTube statistics, obviously the subscribers or the viewers are still 90% or 95% men. Since that's the typical audience even today, what are some of the thoughts? What do you want to mention to the men in the trucking industry in reference to women in trucking?
Be allies. I want the men to be allies. And 15% of our members are men who join because they support our mission. But I need men to be supportive, and don't treat women any differently, but think it could be your mom, your sister, your aunt, your grandma, and treat them with respect, because the number one place where female drivers are harassed is truck stops by other drivers. So any driver out there, please treat women with respect, and we could get rid of a lot of the negative image of our industry if everyone treated each other with respect.
Oh, that's true in every industry.
Right. Especially male-populated industries, things like construction and trucking and things like that.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm excited. I have a daughter, and, just seeing, like you've mentioned, people come up to you and thanking you and wanting to get autographs, and you're successful in your career, even a male-dominated career. And I'm so excited for role models like you, that my daughter, your grandkids can see, and the stories being told that are on the website, continue to push those. I'm just super excited to continue seeing that, and we'll do our part to continue to spread that message as well.
Follow Women in Trucking on social media, everything, in all social media areas. We have a very strong presence. We also have a newsletter and a magazine, and we do webinars. And I would just say, if you support the mission of gender diversity in the trucking industry, and when I say trucking, as you said at the beginning, it's all women in the industry who work, brokers, trucking, warehousing, everything. We need to support each other, but we also need men who support the mission as well. So the website is womenintrucking.org.
Ellen, thank you again so much for joining me today. Like and subscribe this video so her message can get out. Go follow them on YouTube. Go give a like and subscribe on their social media. Join the newsletter, join the association, and be a part, be involved. That's the most important piece here, is continuing to spread the word. Get them from 8,000 to 100,000 as quickly as possible. thank you so much for joining us. And if there's any questions or comments that you have down below for Ellen, we'll pass them on and try to answer them as best as possible. But with that, and as always, stay safe out there.